You know, they say that you can't go home again, but if you can do the time warp again, maybe you can also go home again? So, Patreon-sponsored review, and this one was an interesting one. I've got 2 Patreon-sponsored reviews this month, which was kind of cool. That's a first. Shock Treatment, the kind of sort of sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'd never seen this before. I knew it existed. I think most Rocky Horror fans certainly at least know it exists. I don't know how many people have actually seen it. It's a thing. Okay, boy. How do I even start explaining this thing? Well, let's start by its actual relation to Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's got a fair number of the same people involved. The big ones being the director, Jim Sharman, I believe is his name, and Richard O'Brien, who played Riff Raff and also wrote the music and came up with the story for Rocky Horror Picture Show, is back in those same capacities and playing a new character. But excuse me, Patricia Quinn, who played Magenta, she's also back. Nell Campbell, who played Columbia, she's in it. Charles Gray, who played the criminologist, he's in it. And we also have 4 returning characters. We have previously incredibly minor characters from Rocky Horror Picture Show, Betty and Ralph Hapschatt. That's the couple getting married at the very start of that movie. They appear in this. And in addition, Brad and Janet are back. Though that's a little odd because of all the returning actors they were able to wrangle. They did not get Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon, so it's odd that the recurring characters they brought back, they didn't have the original actors. But, okay. Boy, where do I begin with this thing? Okay, let me kind of jump to the end and say, this doesn't work. But it's kind of fascinating to sort of pick apart and figure out why. Because on paper, there's a lot of carryover between this and Rocky Horror Picture Show in terms of the kinds of weirdness, the people behind it, the type of music, because yes, it is a musical, the general feel and vibe. It's very, very similar, and it obviously is intended as a kind of sequel to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and yet somehow it doesn't all pull together. Let me try and tackle the plot. This is not going to make any sense, all right? And because it was funny, I watched it, I'm like, I'm not sure I understood that. Then I looked up a synopsis of it, and like, I was almost kind of hoping the synopsis was gonna reveal to me that I was like completely wrong in what I thought I understood, except I was mostly right, which, you know, I guess that's in its favor, but that means I kind of followed it, but it still didn't make sense. Okay, so there's a town called Denton, but it's also a TV studio that the entire population of which is either making and appearing in or serving as the live audience for TV shows. Brad and Janet arrive there, now married, and Brad is, he's emotionally stunted and kind of a wet blanket, and Janet's starting to get annoyed with him for that. They appear on this sort of game show thing that the upshot of which is Brad gets committed to a mental hospital, which is also a TV show. It's kind of a soap opera, and that is run by a somewhat unnerving doctor and his sister. That's Richard O'Brien and Patricia Quinn, and Nell Campbell is there as a nurse. There is also I mentioned the Hapschatts. There's Betty Hapschatt, who's kind of a newsreader, and she and Ralph are separated, and she is hooking up with Charles Gray's character, who is a sort of a sociological sort of guy. I think she says he's a judge. and they're kind of hooking up and looking into stuff, though I'm not entirely sure why. And then Ralph, he is also a sort of a presenter, and he is shacking up with his co-host. And there's also a blind, weird German guy played by Barry Humphries, otherwise known as Dame Edna. And there's also a fast food magnate who just bought the town/news station. And also there's like a twist with long lost twins down the line, and Janet is turned into a local celebrity, and and Janet's parents are there too, and it's, yeah, if you made any sense out of that, then you've done better than I have. And I think in many ways my inability to explain like even a basic premise setup of this, it kind of cuts to the heart of what doesn't quite work, which is that as weird as Rocky Horror Picture Show was, because it was weird, it builds the weirdness over time, and it also gives us an initial sort of stable grounding in Brad and Janet, because they are so normal, at least initially. And when you're, because ultimately the starting premise of Rocky Horror is ordinary couple goes to weird house. Cool. And then the weirdness happens in waves. It happens in layers. So, you know, normal couple goes to weird house. Okay. There's some weird people there. All right. There's a very weird host. Okay. He's also a scientist who has made a sort of a Frankenstein. All right. And like but we're doing the weirdness one after another, but not all at once, which is kind of what shock treatment does. It really does shove a lot at you right from the get-go, and it makes it really hard to find that grounding, find that place to get your feet underneath you and actually wrap your head around what the heck is going on. You're playing catch-up pretty much the entire time. Now, I do want to say that as much as structurally it would appear that Shock Treatment is very much a cash-in sequel, you know, get everybody that we can back and just basically do kind of the same thing, I don't get the same level of cynicism from it that I usually get from that kind of setup. I do get the feeling that Richard O'Brien and Jim Sharman really were trying to say something and do something a little bit different with this. And I do think I do get a sense of passion in this. Though I think that also contributes to part of the problem, the fact that they were trying to do something, because even though Rocky Horror Picture Show has a lot of undercurrents and a lot of layers and a lot of subtext and brushes past and incorporates a lot of themes, it's not really, strictly speaking, about any of those themes. Not explicitly. So, you know, there's all the stuff about, you know, kink and accepting who you are, and, you know, everybody's weird, and that's all there, but that's not what the plot is actually about. Whereas in Shock Treatment, they are trying to very flatly and obviously do, you know, have something to say about consumerism, about modern entertainment, about the lie of the middle-class American dream, about fashion, about mental health. You know, and trying to like have something to say about all this stuff adds to the awkwardness of it overall. I don't want to slam it across the board, though, because there's definitely some good stuff in here. Some of the music is actually quite good. I don't think any of it achieves the highs of Rocky Horror Picture Show, but there are some good songs. The titular song, Shock Treatment, is a good one. Also, I really liked Little Black Dress. That was a pretty good one. There were some others as well, but there were also some that was like, okay. And this is a little bit nitpicky, but this threw me off too. Well, actually, I'll put this in the broader context of the recasting of Brad and Janet, which I kind of touched on. So while there's nothing really bad or wrong with these actors, they're not Barry Bostwick and Susan Sarandon. And I don't mean to be that as a slam, but, you know, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, it lucked out with some of its casting, because pretty much none of these people were big names at the time they were used. But a fair number of them had very strong careers afterwards, sort of proving the, like, wow, we got lucky snatching them up before they were big. And these two don't have that going for them. And it also really threw me off, this is the nitpicky thing, that this Janet has a much slower singing register than Susan Sarandon did. Susan Sarandon sang very high in Rocky Horror Picture Show, like almost deliberately squeaky at some points. This woman's got a very deep singing voice, and that's not inherently bad or a worse way to sing, and she does it perfectly fine, but I know Rocky Horror Picture Show so well that that threw me off something fierce. I'm trying to think where else I want to go with this. Like, it has so many components and so many pieces that were present in Rocky Horror Picture Show, yet they just don't quite come together. And I think it is a combination of missing sort of the pacing of Rocky Horror Picture Show and just throwing all the weirdness in at once, which, like, even for somebody who loves Rocky Horror Picture Show, is kind of too much. You know, I was still trying to wrap my head around this whole thing of, like, wait, it's a town, but, like, everyone who lives in the town is in this TV studio. I didn't even really get my head wrapped around that before we got to the next weird thing that I'm like, wait, now what? Now what? Wait. And you just kind of feel bombarded by all of it. But I think ultimately, well, first of all, let me be very clear. I'm glad I saw it. And actually, I might look into whether or not I can buy, like, some of the individual tracks, like on Amazon or something, or if I'd have to buy the whole soundtrack album. Because depending on price, I might not be up for that. But there are some good songs. Basically, any time Richard O'Brien and Patricia Quinn were on screen, especially if they were singing, I was kind of enraptured because I find those two immensely magnetic. I always have. So, you know, that was really good stuff. Some of the songs are actually also really well shot in terms of choreography and camera work. Some are also incredibly dull as a weird sort of upshot of the TV studio conceit. They kind of overuse the, you know, head in a TV screen as a default bit of imagery, and it's boring. I'm sorry, it just is. But yeah, nobody feels like they're phoning it in. They are trying, and I think that effort does elevate it a little bit more than just, well, that didn't work. No, and it didn't work, but it also, you know, it felt like it came from a good place, from good instincts. And so I would sort of label it under, it's an oddity for fans. It's a bit like when a music artist had a weird experimental concept album that you know, somewhere along the line that maybe it didn't work, but if you're a fan of them, maybe you check that out. Or to put it in movie terms, I would recommend it on the similar basis that I'd recommend something like the Doctor Who TV movie that had Paul McGann in it. Like, it's not good, but if you're a fan of Doctor Who, I recommend you watch it because it's an interesting oddity with some good elements. Or if you really like the Beatles, if you haven't seen it, I would recommend that you watch the movie Across the Universe. It's not a good movie. It's an amazing mess. But if you are watching through the filter of that fandom, I think you'll still get something out of it that's worth getting. And I feel the same about this with its relation to Rocky Horror and its appeal to that same kind of thing. That said, if Rocky Horror was not your bag, this will really not be for you. Although, you know, if there's anyone out there who likes this but doesn't like Rocky Horror Picture Show, I'd love to, like, sit down and have a conversation with them, pick their brain, figure out how that worked. So, shock treatment. Have you seen it? Probably not, but if you have, what'd you think about it? And if not, what are your thoughts on anything that I've said? Drop them on down in the comments and let's talk about it. A whole bunch of stuff you can do because there's buttons and links. There's a P.O. Box, the Patreon, plus a whole bunch of other stuff. It's all down in the description, so check it out if you want to. If you don't, that's okay too, because you know what? At the end of the day, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.